Kia ora, Kiwi Codger here, and welcome to episode 78, The Elizabeth Affair Part 2. Now, my background's in engineering, so I always want to know how things happen, the logistics of making it happen, and the resources to make it happen. I've been learning a 3D software package called Blender, and I'm starting to get the hang of it. The length of time between episodes currently is because of this learning journey. That said, I purchased the ship's model from the internet, but it was only the outer shell, so I've had to construct the interior, as some of the scenes in the Elizabeth Affair happen in the ship's cabins. Now, in this journey, I've learned a lot about sailing ships of the period. Some fascinating stuff that I'd like to share. Then we'll apply it to the Elizabeth's trip down to Akaroa. So firstly, let's take a closer look at the Elizabeth. It's a 236-tonne brig. Now, the 236 tonnes refers to the weight of water it displaces. Effectively, the bigger the tonnage, the bigger the ship. A brig or brigantine is a two-masted, cross-sailed ship. Cross-sailed means that the sails are at right angles to the line of the hull. She's 88.3 feet or 27.2 metres long, and width 26.9 feet or 8.3 metres. There's 6 feet between decks. The Elizabeth carries 8 cannons and 2 swivel guns. The cannons are to deter pirates, the swivel guns to clear the decks. She has a crew of around 25. She unloaded her cargo in Sydney, so would have been pretty empty for her New Zealand charter and would have taken on ballast to stabilise the ship. She carries 4 cases of muskets plus 18 individual muskets, giving a total of 118 guns. There is the usual other items of shot, flint, powder, ironmongery and tobacco. They are after a cargo of New Zealand flax fibre, 50 tonnes if they can get it. So what are the economics of such a charter? Well, muskets cost around £2.10 shillings each, or £2.50. So the cost for those is £295. Another, say, £50 for the shot, powder and flints. There's the hireage of the ship, which could often be a cut of the profit, and wages for the crew and necessary stores. Let's say direct cost for the trip is £600. Flax is selling in Sydney for £33 per tonne, but the Royal Navy in London is offering £45 per tonne for the much superior New Zealand fibre. Let's take the average price of £35, so for 50 tonnes that would give revenue of £1,750. If things went well, a ship could visit New Zealand and return within a month. The profit being £1,150, a huge amount. Of course, if there's problems, then the profit bleeds away, but still, the margin's such that obstacles and delays are well worth putting up with. Let's examine the Elizabeth in more detail. This is my representation of what it looked like inside, based on general knowledge, but certainly not off any plans. At the stern is the captain's office and quarters. He would have had his own private toilet. There was accommodation for passengers, the supercargo, and the first mate probably had some privacy. Here are 2 rooms for that purpose. The crew would have lived out of their pack and had a hammock to sleep in. Depending on space, some on different shifts may have hot-bedded. That is, someone coming off shift would use the warm bed of someone coming on shift. The galley I have put here. The coal-fired stove is usually kept alive most of the time. The stoves of the day had a facility for desalinating seawater. However, the main water is taken on when in port and stored in sealed barrels. Washing of body and clothes is done with seawater, got by throwing a bucket over the side, hauling it back in. For toilets, the crew and passengers used the head. The head is a set of log drops at the front of the ship. There's little privacy. One clambers over, drops their trowel, and does their business. Anything that doesn't make it to the sea washes off the bow in due course. For butt management, there's a rope that dangles down into the sea, the end hopefully frayed. You simply haul up the rope, give the appropriate area some maintenance, then drop it back for the sea to clean. How brilliant is that? In bad weather, you'd get the feeling that buckets were used and emptied when everything calmed down. Probably the rare woman passenger uses a bucket. For Tahiko's plan, the Ngāti Toa will be confined below decks. Again, buckets are probably used then. The rest of the ship is for cargo. There are hatches so that cargo can be lowered down through the decks and stored at places decided by the captain or loadmaster. All ships of this period had small leaks. The water makes its way down into the bilge right at the bottom here. There are manually operated bilge pumps to pump this out. A sharp eye is kept on this. Storms stress the ship and cause more leaks. If leaks are serious, then next time in port, maintenance is done. If getting back to port isn't possible, the ship is beached at high tide and maintenance done when the tide goes out. This could last a number of days till the leaks were caulked and sealed. It's the ship's carpenter that organises this. Captain Cook did this a few times in his explorations. It's a risky business. Refloating the ship is the main issue. Quite a bit of light gets down to the first deck, and really you need lanterns for the second and third deck, unless the ship is loading and the hatches are up. A ship has to be readied for its various duties. When readying for sail, everything is secured for the increased motion. Hammocks are put out, fresh water brought up, the food and stores needed made accessible. When in port, there is the loading phase, hammocks down with access made to all the decks via the hatches. The rest of the time, things were done to suit. It's the captain or first mate who determine the sail configuration, which is dependent on the wind and direction. It was a careful balance between speed and safety. Let's consider the voyage from Kapiti to Akaroa Harbour. The trip is said to have taken 4 to 5 days. I haven't found any account of the details of the trip, so what I'm talking about is conjecture. Now, the main initial reason for modelling the Elizabeth was to get an idea of where the 120 Ngāti Toa were going to fit on the Elizabeth. Let's put all 120 on deck. Here they are. Well, there's 122. 2 are using the head. There's too many for the crew to work the ship. You would imagine a maximum of 40 would have been allowed up on deck at any one time, so there's probably shifts on deck even for the Ngāti Toa. Let's have a look at the area below deck. There's enough space to accommodate everyone, but it would have been cramped and quite dark down there on the second deck. It's reasonable to assume that perhaps 10 of the 120 were familiar with ships and had worked on them. They would have been instrumental in supervising the rest and the processes of the ship and the safety of the ship. Lanterns are needed on the second and third decks and at night on all decks. They come with a fire risk, and almost everyone, Pākehā and Māori, were pipe smokers, which was another fire risk. With gunpowder, whale oil and dried flax fibre, a fire could get out of control very quickly. The first 2 days of the voyage sees many suffering seasickness, especially after leaving the wind shadow of Kapiti and passaging through the Cook Strait. The smell of body odour, tobacco and vomit must have been overpowering at times. Te Hiko and Te Rao Paraha hold planning meetings with their men. Signals are agreed to as when the enemy is close, and silence is a must. Contingencies discussed and roles assigned. Tauhangas divine the will of the gods. The signs are auspicious. They are a small band entering enemy territory. Many things can go wrong. Being fully armed with muskets tips the balance in their favour. Their intelligence on the kāinga of Takapuneke is from prisoners taken at Omihi, but it's now 6 months old. They round the eastern side of Banks Peninsula. Captain Stewart gets Cal to inform Te Rao Paraha that they are 2 hours out from the entrance to Akaroa Harbour. The implementation begins. Te Rao Paraha instructs all the men to retire below decks, then joins them. Preparations for their confinement are completed. They will not be back on deck for some time. All signs of the Ngāti Toa's presence has been removed. It's early afternoon as the Elizabeth rounds Te Ruahine Point and tacks up the Akaroa Harbour. The unfortified kāinga of Takapuneke, now only 9 kilometres away. Okay, I was at Takapuneke one dawn morning in April 2023 and droned the area. Let's go up and get our bearings. Okay, so we've got Banks Peninsula here and we've got the Akaroa Harbour running north, and just to the south of Akaroa Township is Takapuneke, and the grey section you see in the right hand corner of that field is a monument to Takapuneke, not quite finished yet, but we'll be taking off from there and we'll drift out into the harbour, towards Wainui, and we'll look north and then turn around south and then head back in for a closer look at Takapuneke. So this was unfinished at the time, the Takapuneke monument, but it's since been opened. Now in the distance we have Wainui there, and down below us we're flying over the Takapuneke beach, and we've basically made it out to where I mentioned. So there's Wainui on the left, and we're traversing around. I'd come down the night before and I'd droned Onawe, a little peninsula, and you can see Onawe there, right there, and perhaps I'll do an episode of that because that does get attacked by Te Rao Paraha. A couple of years later he comes back down again. Oh man, Tahu, gee, poor buggers. Anyway, we're traversing around, we have Wainui there again, and we're coming down to the heads at the Akaroa Harbour. So I did this droning in the morning, then I went off to Kaiapoi and droned to Kaiapoia, and you've seen part of that footage in other episodes. So now we're coming around the eastern coast of the Akaroa Harbour, and that green area you can see in front of you there, that's Takapuneke. So I've flown back, and you can see the monument at the top corner of that left-hand field. That's where I took off from. But in the middle, you can see the creek, or the water runoff down through the middle of that area there, and the village, the kāinga of Takapuneke, would have been based around that, where those trees are at the moment in the middle of the scene there. This is also called Red House Bay because a red house has been built just to the left of that white shed that you can see on the coastline there. Okay folks, that brings us to the end of part 2. If you learned something new, then smack the like button and subscribe. Part 3 will be a doozy. It'll begin with the Elizabeth running out anchors off the beach of Takapuneke. I look forward to your company then. But until then, hei kona. Take it easy.